And joining us now to talk weather, Eric Snodgrass from Nutrien. Eric, it's great to have you back on, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm south though, so I'm really doing well. I got nice warm weather out, and I can see the ocean from my hotel room. So sure beats being home in Champaign, Illinois, where the temperatures are. Well, they got a wind chill warning this morning, so I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, I know you were traveled around quite a bit, going to various meetings and talking about weather conditions. Our farmers and ranchers, they're worried about what U.S. weather is going to look like here as we get into spring planting season and beyond. And we could talk about that, but I think a good place to start South American weather because that is really the focal point that's driving our markets right now. And a lot of folks are just curious about some of this dryness and some of the dryness issues and crop losses potentially in parts of Brazil and Argentina. So, what's the latest you're seeing with weather down there?
Yeah. Why don't we go south to north? We'll start in Argentina. And what was a very dry end of December through much of January, just in the last week, has met, in some places, flooding rains. I'm talking several inches of rain we've been able to observe from satellite. So what that's done is that's, already the damage done on the early planted stuff is not going to fix that. But what it's going to do is going to help out anything that was planted a little bit later. But it was one of those situations where, they broke their drought with, in some places, like 6 to 7 inches of rain. And we all know that that's not the ideal way to break a drought. So I can't necessarily say that this was a full net positive for Argentina, but it hit Buenos Aires, it hit Cordoba, even got up to Santa Fe. I'll be interested to see if the Paraná River comes up, because remember, they've had problems with barge traffic on the Paraná River because in some places the water's only 3 feet deep. And usually at times it can be as much as 30 plus feet deep in certain places. So we need to keep an eye out on that. But southern Brazil is the real tricky part because they've had a few fronts slide out of the south across southern Brazil, delivering some rainfall. But it has not undone the longer term drought stress. Now, if the weather forecast models we've gotten early this week verify, southern Brazil is the place that's going to be wet, not just now, but moving forward through much of the rest of February, even. And then we get farther to the north. The dryness that we've lately seen in Mato Grosso to Bahia, and by the way, that's about 60% of Brazil's soybeans are right in there, Mato Grosso to Bahia. That area, the dryness was perfectly timed because they were super wet while everybody else was in drought. They're now harvesting the first crop of soybeans and planting the safrinha crop, and we would call that an on-time harvest and an on-time planting. But now the concern becomes with the fading La Nina. Historically, the monsoonal circulation shuts down early. I'm talking early, like in April, maybe even early May, rather than lasting through May. So now we've got longer term concern about drought developing where it hasn't been, and that's been in the north and some key growing states there. Because remember, 75% of that safrinha crop is, or excuse me, of the corn crop is safrinha, that second crop. So I think I'm gonna have to just watch. I mean, that's a huge geographical area that I'm trying to keep an eye on, and they're all dealing with different things. So you asked, that's the long and short of it.
Well, you mentioned a fading La Nina, and I think that's a good segue to U.S. weather potential getting into the spring. I know some folks are watching La Nina closely. Is that going to continue into our spring planting and affect us here? We've had dryness in the southwestern plains. We've had some clipper systems and Arctic cold come through here recently. But I mean, what are you seeing in regards to the U.S. planting window as we start to inch closer to that here in the weeks ahead, Eric?
Yeah, let's start in the Southern Plains. In fact, let's extend the Southern Plains all the way back to California as well, that whole region from the Southern Plains to California. They've not had what we call the subtropical branch of the jet stream form out of the Pacific. That's the more southern branch that targets those areas and can deliver lots of precipitation. So we've seen drought expand in the Southern Plains. We've seen drought after a fantastic December come back into place in parts of California. And California is wishing for what they call a miracle March. That's where the pattern flips around and all of a sudden just brings in all the moisture that they need. Now, the mountains are doing pretty well in terms of snow. They've kind of gone through January, which has been dry, and done okay. But as you get into spring planting, as we get into these bigger issues, I'll just say this. There's been quite a bit of snow on the upper Mississippi River Valley. In North Dakota, unlike a year ago, there's good snowpack. There was not a year ago. Where I needed to build is in South Dakota. I needed to build into Montana. That's the headwaters of the Missouri River. And that way we can get more moisture flowing into that soil early this year. Now, what we've also seen is that the track of the storm systems has loved to like dip through the Midwest, but avoid it, get down into the Tennessee Valley, Ohio Valley, turn north, hit north. I mean, North Carolina. North Carolina this winter's had more snow than I've had in my backyard in Champaign, Illinois. We had a dusting the other day. I think that finally brought us up to an inch on the season. We're in this big snow hole in that part of the country. February may start to cure some of those problems. We're seeing a much more active pattern that could run right through the Ohio Valley rather than going a bit south of it. And that could really change things up and keep that area wet. So the only place in the country that I am overly concerned about drought continuing is the Southern Plains. And if by the end of March into early April, that's not shrinking, but instead it expands into Missouri, maybe even as far north as Nebraska, and if it hits Southwest Iowa, then I'll be really concerned about it for the upcoming summer. Could allow us for a fast plant, but what does that mean for the summer jet stream position should that be there? And all of this, again, La Nina is our biggest global weather factor right now. The MJO is secondary. The polar vortex is secondary. It's that La Nina and what it's going to end up doing that I think will affect all of those things. So I hate to say it, but looking out there at spring right now, I'm going to put a big giant question mark on it because I need to see how quickly that La Nina fades before we get a better picture of what to expect.
And how about the cold air we've seen here recently dipping down into some of those southern states a little bit? And I know it's made for a tough go, not only for humans, but also for livestock across the northern plains. What are you looking at? Are we going to see more of these cold shots dip down out of the Canadian prairies here in the next couple of weeks ahead?
Yeah, and this is a great question because if we just think back, December, record warm. 10 states broke their all-time record. A whole bunch more were second place by 1933. Then you come to what we saw in January, which is all of a sudden we've just unlocked Arctic air from the Canadian prairie, and it's now making routine visits all the way down to the Gulf Coast. In fact, I brought some of it with me here to Florida. Now, when we think about where this is all going to go, the next about 8 days, I feel really confident in seeing a western ridge, more shots at some colder air. But the models, the big ones, the GFS and the ECMW, those are our two main models for the near-term weather. They completely diverge beyond day 10. So right about the time the groundhog's poking his little head out of the hole and going to tell us if he sees a shadow or not, the rest of the world's going to be going, what's going to happen to this pattern? Is it going to shift around? Now, I think we're going to see the redevelopment of a southeastern ridge. That's going to push more cold north and west. That's going to open up the Gulf of Mexico, bring in more moisture into the midsection of the country. That is what I'm currently seeing for the month of February. It is nothing like last February. Remember the massive polar vortex disruption, the cold air that came down. I was also pushed by two big ridges in Alaska and Greenland. And that cold air came right down the middle part of the country, made it to the Gulf of Mexico with not just sub-freezing temperatures, but temperatures that were 40 degrees colder. Don't see that happening. Thank God for that. But this is going to be a highly volatile time period as we move forward. And I'll say this. I know I complained about the lack of snow in my part of the country, but every time we get these brutally cold Arctic air masses, it sends the freeze line deeper into the soil. You get contraction, which helps with compaction. So I guess I can't really complain overall, as long as that moisture does return at some point before we get into April.
Well, a lot of things to consider moving forward. Eric, any final thoughts, real quick, before we run out of time?
No, I think everyone should watch ocean temperatures as their best seasonal predictor. And I'll tell you the number one thing I'm concerned about, in addition to the drought in the southern plains, is cold water maybe hanging around in the Gulf of Alaska. I don't like to see cold water in the Gulf of Alaska when I talk about Midwest weather for summer.
Well, that's something to keep an eye on. And you can sign up for Eric's daily newsletter as well. You can find the link on our website, markettalkag.com. And Eric, we appreciate the time. Thank you for joining us once again and catching us up on the latest with the weather situation. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.